for me.
Yeah, this is one of those things that despite there have been a few movies made on this, and it's always blown me away that they didn't do this, because this is a chase scene handed to you on a silver platter. This is actually what happened. First of all, Caril jumps into the car with the police officer. The police officer didn't see Charlie. He was in the middle of the road about to kill another person, but the police officer didn't see it because there was a truck in front of him. So Caril's like screaming incomprehensibly. The officer doesn't understand her. Finally, she just says the word Starkweather. The guy just gets chilled. He looks out the window. Charlie sees the police officer, sees him, lets go of the gun that he was using, just about to kill this other guy, jumps in his car, drives off, and the officer picked up a radio and called for somebody else to chase Charlie while he has Caril. That officer, by the way, was later credited as, quote-unquote, capturing Caril Fugate. And those are the articles that came out and all that, and it's just so ridiculous. Anyway, so Charlie drives off, and another police car chases after him. This chase goes over 100 miles an hour through these country roads in Wyoming. They wind up going through a small town where they have to slow down and stuff, wind up on sidewalks, swerving all over the place. Their bumpers they come so close that their bumpers lock, and they're locked together for a little while. Then Charlie pulls away. They get on the country again. They're going up to 100 miles an hour. There's a guy out the window shooting at Charlie. Charlie's reaching his hand out, shooting back at them. And finally, one of the bullets nicks him in the ear, and Charlie stops and gets out screaming, "I've been hit! I've been hit!" But that's the chase scene where he was captured. And it's like how it's always portrayed in this much more tame kind of way. And I'm like, history just handed you an amazing car chase there, guys.
So you threw it out, some of the adaptations of what actually happened. One of the ones that I actually like, because it kind of tells two sides of the story, what may have happened, what she says happened, that type of thing, is Murder in the Heartland, that TV miniseries. I thought that as far as, it wasn't perfect, obviously. It was a made-for-TV movie, but as what they had to work with, I thought they did a pretty good job. That was one of the better ones to me, because they actually gave more than one side, and they weren't trying to sensationalize too much.
Right. In fact, actually, we were involved in that. I'm an extra in there. You can see me sort of back in the back. And I was actually they were going to give me some lines originally, because I was technically supposed to be playing my father, but then they sort of cut the storyline out with my grandfather and father, relationship. But one of the things that I really appreciated was the fact that they were fair on both sides. I mean, I would actually, as much as I'm on the side of, believing Caril was innocent, and my family, of course, had a history of defending her and everything, I still want I actually would not be crazy about a film that was done that completely was 100% on her side. I would rather see something that's done fairly and factually, so that the audience gets all the information so that they can decide. Because to me, that's what I've always been arguing in favor of, is being fair about it, is seeing what the real facts are, not just one side. Even if it's my side, I don't want just that one side shown. I want it to be, shown both of them. And that's what I really liked about that. And just like you say, it's a TV movie from the 90s, so there are definitely some cheesy elements. But Tim Roth plays Charlie Starkweather. He's phenomenal. Fruza Balk plays Caril Fugate. She's amazing. Brian Denny did his best job to play my grandfather. My grandfather was like as different as he could possibly be from Brian Denny, but I really respected the man. I actually got to know him during the thing, and he was really like he admired my grandfather, and he wanted to do as respectful and good a job as possible. Everybody involved in that all the actors were so concerned with accuracy on it that one of the producers had to go up to my father, who was a consultant on it, and say, you know what, when particularly Tim Roth was so adamant about accuracy, when Tim comes up to you asking, this thing or that thing, can you consult with us first? Because he had become, like, as soon as he'd find something out, he would go on set and he'd be like, this is what we're doing. He wouldn't even consult with the director anymore. He'd be like, this is what we're doing because this is what actually really happened. Everybody was very concerned with doing things most of them actually come to think of. There's one producer who put guard towers inside of the courtroom. That guy was a little bit not quite as concerned with accuracy, but the rest of them were very, very concerned about being accurate and all that. And it's a really, I think, a very good, fair version of the story. So.
It just crossed my mind that the man who played your grandfather also played John Wayne Gacy and Bobby Knight. That's kind of a cool list of credits for Brian Dennehy there. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah,
so, something to take home.
Yeah, he's really he played a very very wide range of parts. But
yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so let's get to the inevitable verdict, and then what happens from there. Because, I mean, the story does not end at the verdict, and that's the important thing about your book. That is anything but the ending.
Right. Yeah, so in the end, they found her as guilty. Oh, and real quick note as well, if you ever see Murder in the Heartland again, or if anybody looks at that, the juror who, the foreman who says, we have your honor, or they have reached your verdict, we have your honor, that's actually my father. That was the little role they gave him in the film. But anyway, so he, they found her guilty, and she looks at the jury and says, if you really thought I was guilty, why didn't you give me the chair? And because they asked that she be given life in prison, and that was the sentence that she was given, instead of the electric chair. And apparently the jury had said that outright first. The first thing they said was, well, we won't even consider this unless the electric chair is off. They just were, it was too much for them to give a 14-year-old the electric chair. Anyway, so she goes into prison, and because she's, at this point, 15 years old, she had her birthday during the trials, she's too young to be in the general public of, in the, not general public,
general
but
population.
General population of the prison. And so she is isolated in her own room. So she literally has, she's literally given the, what is it called, isolation, which is usually considered torture for people, for 2 years. She's not allowed to speak with other prisoners, and very few guests. I mean, her family's gone, except for her sister comes to visit every now and then. But yeah, so she's put in isolation for a couple of years. The person in charge of the prison is pretty much nuts, like bipolar. I mean, I don't think she was ever diagnosed with that, but you can tell, because she would be like really, really nice to Caril one minute, and then just all of a sudden just kind of go off on her the next, and that was pretty much the only visitor she would have most of the time. But my grandfather, a lot of lawyers at that point are just like, well, that's it, I did my job, and left. But my grandfather was so appalled at the way that the justice system had treated Caril, and was so convinced of her innocence, that he stuck with her. They offered to pay him for the trial, and he just basically refused it. His partner ended up cashing the check, but my grandfather refused because he was just, like I say, so appalled. And also they had paid him less than they had paid each of Charlie's attorneys, and he's just like, you've been insulting me through this whole thing, and this is kind of like the last insult. So he just continued pro bono. That's why I named the book Pro Bono, because he wouldn't take any payment for this. This is kind of, he would normally, his usual cases were divorces, and so that's sort of what he was living off of while he just continued with this case. And he'd travel out to York, which was like a 2-hour drive or something like that from Lincoln, to go and visit her and continue to work on her case. And he basically knew that the only way she was going to get a fair trial was to get it into a court outside of Nebraska. So when you go up the chain of, the legal ladder, as it were, you eventually get to district court, which is, just the district of that area of the several states. So, but he had to first work his way through the Nebraska legal system, and each time he would file to have the trial redone in Nebraska, he always knew he was going to get rejected, and the state would always wait until the last day that you have a certain amount of days to respond. They always waited exactly to the last day to respond to each of the things, so as to maximize the amount of time each one would take. The prosecuting attorney, meanwhile, Delmer Scheel, who had fabricated the whole thing and basically or organized the whole thing against Caril, he winds up going on to be promoted to being a judge, and a lot of the people involved in that get promoted. It's this very unfair kind of situation. But my grandfather just keeps on pushing with that, and he gets it to the point where it should go out in district court. But then the state legislature passed a bill that my grandfather referred to as the Keep Caril in Prison Act, because they actually had a different name, but it literally had no basis or bearing for any other legal case, and had no reason even to pass, except that it would make him have to go through the entire legal process again through Nebraska. So he had climbed the ladder, was almost at district court, and now because of this act that just passed, just as he got to that point, he was going to have to go through them again. And so all these years are passing while he's doing that. She gets to a point where she's been in prison so long that she could go up for parole if she wanted, and she'd probably get it because she's been a model prisoner this entire time, never had a single mark against her, which was a record. Nobody had ever had that. In fact, other prisoners made it sort of a point to try to get her in trouble to break that record. But would never get in trouble. In fact, she actually became what was called the gate girl, where she would let people in and out of the prison. She had the key to the front gate, so she literally had the key to her own escape. But she wouldn't use it. She just, continued. And she could have gone up for parole, but she just was like, no, I want a new trial. I want to prove that I'm innocent. And so she, kept on hoping and waiting, and they finally got to district court. And the first time they had almost gotten there was a judge who had said he was going to give her another case or another trial. But when they got the second time, he recused himself because he had actually, we don't really know for certain, but we think it was because it was like he had a relative who worked with my grandfather. And so he was like, I can't be the judge here, but, I'll pass it on to one of these others. And the other judge just decided, no, I'm not going to hear this case. And it kept going on, kept going up until it literally got to the United States Supreme Court. And my father, by this point, was involved. He was a teenager when all this began. And as all these legal cases are going on, he actually goes to college, goes to law school, becomes a lawyer himself, and now he's actually practicing, in conjunction with my grandfather. And he gets he has to pass some certain special thing to be able to speak in front of the Supreme Court, and he becomes at that time the youngest man to be given that right. And he actually makes the argument in front of the Supreme Court, and in a just by, I think it's 5-4 decision, but by one vote, they wind up not getting it heard by them. So, and one of the reasons why this is relevant to the Supreme Court is because this had within it all of these important issues that came out in Miranda, and so if anybody doesn't understand what that is, if you ever hear about the Miranda rights, that actually came from a trial called where somebody was named Miranda who hadn't been given their rights or hadn't been told they were being charged and all that. So this had that in there. It had basically several other trial issues. There's one guy named Escobedo. I forget exactly the details, but all that's in the book. But basically it had all these other important issues within it that were being decided by the Supreme Court. And so in a way, like, why not this one as well? But unfortunately, they didn't pass that. They were rejected for that. And so that was as far as you could go. I mean, at that point, she's in prison for life. There's nothing she can do except ask for parole. And so finally she gives in, and she's like, okay. And she goes for parole. And that winds up being a difficult process for her because she, by the way, I might be going past what you asked, and my apologies, but
okay.
to sort of get to the end of this part, she, in order to get parole, you have to basically show you're a changed person. That it's like, yes, I did this horrible thing, but I'm changed now, and here's where I can come into society. For her, she still maintained her innocence, and she didn't know how to, but she was trying to ride this line of like, okay, I'll go along with what you say. And finally, when I was going through the research, I found this time when I just find it to be a beautiful, it's like one of those movie speech moments where she gets to a point and she just goes, I don't know what you want me to say because I still maintain my innocence. And she just breaks down. Instead of playing the charade of I'm guilty but I'm a changed person, she's just like, I still maintain my innocence, but I have to do this in order to get through. But, you want me to be honest, but at the same time you want me to say these things. And basically she just tells them, look, I'm still innocent, but I'm willing to play your game and do whatever you want. But if you want me to say I'm a changed person, I certainly am in that prison, in that any life experience is going to make you a better person, any life experience is going to change you and all that sort of thing, and I have become a better person through some of the people I've known in prison. And she basically took her 17 years of life in prison life and laid it out as, here's the kind of person I have become as a result of all this. But she says, but I didn't do these murders, kind of a thing. And in another one of those just by one vote kind of decisions, she winds up being released after her sentence was commuted, so she still had to wait for like a couple of years, but then she finally was released from prison on parole and moved to another state.
Yeah, she basically took an offered plea after the fact. You know what I mean? It was similar to that to me. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
we've been talking about the legalities of it for a little bit here, so I'll go ahead and ask about